What's up, Buck Dogudini in the garage? Today I got a good one for you. We're going to do some woodworking. I challenged myself to see what I could build with only materials found in the garage. I needed a key holder, a key indexer, a key case for my work keys, and I wanted to do something a little more elegant than just buying one off the shelf. So today we're going to be digging through the garage, finding some materials, and seeing if we can't build something beautiful. Alrighty friends, we're starting with this block of wood that I made off camera. It is Brazilian rosewood and teak. The reason we went with teak is my keys that I'm building this for are my work keys, and I work at a marina. I figured teak made sense being around boats. What we're doing here is I just wanted to tear it down from 80 to about 150 grit, then throw some water on there, and that simulates finish, lets you know what your end product's going to look like, helps you figure out placement and orientation, and if you really want to use that block of wood. Some might say the grain patterns I picked out are a little chaotic, but I dig it. Who here knows? Raise your hand if you can tell me what that chunk of metal's from. If you saw my last video, you know that's from a WJ Grand Cherokee unibody. That's right, I chopped that right out of Willie to fit a winch and a snowplow under it. I figured, hey man, if you're gonna make a project with stuff in the garage, you might as well get some Jeep metal in there, right? Be 100 times stronger and able to climb over tall buildings. Right here, I'm giving a shot to some amateur cold steel moving. Eric picked me up this anvil on the cheap a while ago and said, here you go, now you can play amateur blacksmith. And really here all I was trying to do was take any curves out and just make it flat so that the stock piece was good for laying out, getting started on the project there. You want to start with something flat. And here I'm trying to square it up a bit on the 1x30. Man, I tell you what, if you're going to get into some DIY amateur fabrication, whether it's wood, plastic, metal, whatever have you, run on over to the Hazard Fraud, or www it if things you got to, or don't have one near you. Pick yourself up one of these 1x30s. They're 10 out of 10. They're like 30 bucks, and you can get some really nice belts for them, and then the cheap machine with a nice belt will really take you pretty far down the line. It's a pretty good point, or time in the video to point out that I started this with no real plan. I knew I wanted a pocket knife style, i.e. metal liners, wooden scales that were decorative. I thought originally I was going to go with a U design, kind of similar to some of the off-the-shelf key indexers or key cases I saw, and I ran down that road for a while. That's what we're doing here. I'm working real hard to pull this 90 together, and using the anvil and that big persuader, I was able to get one really nice 90, but the other side, I couldn't find any way. I didn't have anything to mold it around. So here I'm stacking some plates in the old Littlestown vise, the venerable, probably one of the most loyal pieces of iron in the whole shop there. That bad boy, she's held up to some beatings. Anyway, trying to use that as a bit of a press. I don't have a hydraulic press. It's on the old to-do list. Maybe we'll build one here soon. Leave me down there in the squawk boxes. Should I buy one or build one? We both know which direction I'm going to go. What I was trying to do here was just squeeze a tight 90 into the other side. Really wasn't working. Like I said, I ran down this road for a while. We ended up going a different route. This was fun though, playing amateur blacksmith. Again, would recommend, get out in the garage, man. If you have a whim at all, if you've ever had any inkling, hey, I'd like to fabricate a little bit, just get in the garage and do it, bud. I think way too many people don't express their creative sides because they assume that they don't have one, but you do. Trust me, take it from me, you do. It's there. The key is you need low stakes. Right? Don't do it on a project you have to get done. Don't be fabricating something for the house, the wife, whatever have you. Something like this. Hey, if I failed in this key holder, no big deal. Throw it out, bury the footage, no one's ever gonna know. Go and buy one off the Slamazon. Thankfully, I didn't have to go that route. I'm still trying to get my 90 in. I really thought filling it with these plates and just beating it into submission was the answer. Possibly I could have got that to work, but what I ultimately chose to do was move on, and we're going to see that in a minute here. I said, you know what, we're close enough, let's just move on down the road with the project. Sometimes you just got to leap and hope that a landing spot presents itself. I honestly do believe that. So what I did was I laid out where I thought I wanted my holes. In the spirit of using only stuff I found had in the garage, I'm using 16 penny nails for the pins. There's some reasons there. They're strong, they're thick, they have some rust prevention from the manufacturer, which is a plus in an application like this. And they are hardened, which is a plus. Here I'm doing a poor man's rip fence on my Delta belt sander Delta bandsaw that I just am having a devil of a time in my life getting set up properly. I acquired it from my father, who bought it and never used it. I've had it for about 5 years. I use it a couple times a year, and I've replaced tires and bearings and stuff, and I just can't get the saw to, I don't know, cooperate properly. It is a great saw, and I have done some great things with it, and I wouldn't get rid of it for the world, because when you need it, you need it. You know, the space it takes up in the shop, it's well worth it. I wish I could get it dialed in a little better. I do think it needs a new blade, and this was the wrong blade for what I was doing. This is like a scrolling blade. I had a 1/2-inch blade. I couldn't find it. That's really what you'd want for chopping down a block like this, but it did the trick. Long story short, it did the trick a heck of a lot better than me going at it with a dull beaver handsaw. So did we burn it a bit? Yes. That kind of always happens when I cut that rosewood. I think it's just so darn hard. So what I decided, like I said, was let's just move on from the metal shape, and I want to get the scales glued on and start working there and see if maybe once I start with the wood, the metal doesn't matter as much. So I was putting an 80 grit tooth on the metal there so that the epoxy would stick to it. Again, in the spirit of using only what's in the garage, I did not have any 5-minute epoxy. I only had tabletop epoxy, which has some different properties. It's okay for this application. It's not really ideal or what I would have chosen for holding the scales on, but hey, it's the direction we're going. So we mix her up real good, and we're gluing the scales on, and then later we'll actually fix them with pins, but I need them to hold for now. And the epoxy also takes up any imperfections in the two surfaces there. So I'm making sure my orientation is correct, making sure I had my grain going the direction I wanted and all that, and then I slam dance that bad boy Jimmy Jammer on there. And the problem with tabletop epoxy is it takes 72 hours to cure, which really ground this project to a halt. So I got her clamped up in my little jig there, and then I put her in the furnace room to cure for 3 friggin' days. And then I came back to it, and over the course of that 3 days, I rethought all my life choices, and I determined I didn't want this U design, and basically what I'm doing with my hand right now is what I was afraid might have happened over time. So I'm pulling it apart, I'm breaking it. One of the beauties of starting with no plan is it doesn't hurt when you have to change the plan. All right? I find a lot of times if you make a plan, you end up tying yourself in. You're locked down. Now we're committed. Must follow through. Now, there is no plan to begin with. Just let the breeze take you where it wants. So obviously now we're going to a more traditional metal liner, wooden scale, like your pocket knife design. The pins will hold the whole thing together. You'll see in a minute where we're going. With that one, took her over to the 1x30 to just remove those rounded edges that were left over and just flatten out that whole back there. Could I just started here and save myself a whole lot of binging and banging and fighting? Yes, but the beauty here, and like I said in the beginning, don't try this on a project where you need it. This was strictly for fun. If this didn't work, I was just going to keep my keys on the chain I had them on, or I was going to go buy one. So again, trudging on down the road, I'm starting to feel confident in my gut that where I was headed was correct, even though I couldn't see the end of the road. I firmly believe you can approach projects like this as either an artist or a scientist, and we all have an inherent style. I'm not a scientist. I don't approach things with a caliper and specs and all that. I prefer to go at it from a more artistic view, and it's all about the end result. Not that there's anything wrong with being a scientist, it's not how I do it, but I suspect a lot of you, Eric's a scientist, and as a result, his results are more predictable, but really can't fight fate. Anyway, point is here, you saw me mocking stuff up. I actually really like the thickness of a 16 penny nail for this application. It's nice and sturdy, it's never gonna fail. It just fit the project really well. I'm glad that I didn't have any brass pins to use. Whoa, amateur hour on the drill press, look out. Followed quickly by amateur hour with the spinning wheel of death. Do as I say, not as I do. The long and the short of it is that Hitachi grinder is pretty much an extension of my right hand at this point, but if you're not comfortable with machines like that, please be safer than I am. What we're doing here is putting a chamfer on the end of these pins. We're going to peen them down later, but I really just want to expand them to a fraction of this size, or a fraction larger than the original diameter. We'll see at the end, but there's a method to the madness there. Here we're drilling all the holes down the side in both pieces. This is what the final layout's going to look like. This is going to allow me to mock up the key stack, put it together, and then start to shape the scales. I'm going real aggressive. I think that's a 60 grit on there, pulling it down into shape. Again, I'm not approaching this as a scientist, so I didn't draw out the shape. I didn't think about it beforehand. I'm just sort of going with my gut and what the wood and the pin and the size and the shape and what I actually have there, the materials that I'm holding in my hand, what they say and dictate, you know, is the best shape. And I'm actually really happy with the way it came out. It's completely asymmetrical, amorphic, doesn't look like anything, but we're at the 1x30 now to take some of the deeper scratches out and do the beginning of our finish sanding. We got the rough shape there. We're taking out some of the big apprentice marks. Now we're on the random orbital. I think I'm taking from 80 down to 150 on here. This is going to get all the machine marks out. By the time I'm done with 150, you shouldn't see any more machine marks, really shouldn't see any lines. And what that's going to allow me to do is move on to, well, this is the 150 on the random orbital. And like I said, when this one's done, no more machine marks. If you still see machine marks, you're not done sanding. A lot of people end sanding too soon, and the end result is their project suffers. Sanding's about patience. When you think you're done, just keep going for another half hour. And here we are hand sanding. I literally did 3 hours of hand sanding on this. What you're looking at here is, I believe, 220. Yeah, this is 220. And I used this to smooth out my edges and do my last bit of shaping. I hadn't taken down the corners. I hadn't worked on my transitions yet. If you do those on the machine, sometimes they can be too definitive and they don't have nuance, and you miss out on, I don't know, some of the artistic beauty that a piece like this can have. Loving this totally flat surface on the anvil. I'm gonna have to use this more often for sanding. And I did ultimately take it down to 400, which is about as far as you'd want to go on a project like this. There's really no return on investment to go any further, but with that 400, you're left with, I think, a really, really nice looking scale, and some really nice grain patterns. The outside of the scale is actually the end grain, which is unusual. Well, it's the end grain of the teak. You don't usually use the end grain on a scale, so it gives it a very unique look. The bowed grain is because it's, you know, the outside of the tree. I think it's really unique. If you don't know what you're looking at, it might kind of just look off, but sorry for not taking y'all with me. Again, all I'm doing is fitting these pins, putting chamfers on the end, and making sure they're exactly where I want them to be. I end up using a big old chunk of nail for the top pin, the main pin, the hinge pin. I think I'm going to grind that out. You'll see the end result. It looks all right, but I'd like to get a shackle. If somebody makes a shackle that's thin enough diameter but long enough, I guess, throat. But what I have here is she's mocked up. That's what she's going to look like. My next goal here is to set those pins in, and that's where things start to get real hairy. Because of the way I decided to put this together, the finish sanding on the scales had to happen before I affixed the pins. What? What are you doing? What are you doing? Put down the JB weld. Are you serious? He's not going to use JB. He is going to ruin this project. Dear Lord. Oh my God. Look away. You got to be kidding me. What is he thinking? This has to be a joke, right? He's not actually going to use JB weld? Oh boy, life is hard and hard if you're stupid, bud. Okay, he's clearly thinking about it. You can tell he doesn't know. Is JB weld right? No, maybe. Am I going to screw everything up? Probably. No. Do we want to do this? No, right? We're not going to actually do it. What? Stop it, stop it. And just in the nick of time, I realized there was just no way I was going to make JB Weld not be a disaster. I wanted to use JB Weld because tabletop epoxy is really not the best product for holding these pins in. But this is where I made the decision that I was definitely going to peen them over, since the JB Weld was just, what would have happened? I would have had JB Weld stains on the wood. It would have been on the inside of the scales. It would have been a disaster. So I'm glad I pulled up from that one. The tabletop epoxy, I had to really sit and think, like, how do I do this? Because I don't want epoxy stains on the wood. I already did the finish sanding. Those scales are done. They need to be protected. I should have covered them with masking tape, but I was afraid the adhesive might leave a stain. Whatever. So what I did was I mixed up our epoxy and I thinned it a little bit by heating it up. That's how you thin epoxy, you heat it up. And I put it on my scrap wood, and the idea here was just to wet the ends of the dowel. I wasn't putting enough on to actually hold them in place. I just wanted to wet them so that in the future epoxy applied would hold to it. So I did that on both pins. I got them in place. That little bit of epoxy took up just enough space that they held real nice. So at this point everything's working out really well.
And like I said, 5-minute epoxy would have been better for this, or 20-minute epoxy. Tabletop epoxy is designed for its clarity and self-leveling and all that. Not really, whatever. I'm not an epoxy aficionado. I don't know why I'm pontificating like I am. So what I came up with was this. I went and got an acid brush, a paint brush, chip brush, whatever you want to call it. I get the acid brush, that'd be the correct term. I took one single strand out of it, and I'm going to use that to essentially paint epoxy into the gap between the pin and the scale liner there. And it was tedious, and I looked like a jabroni doing it, for sure, but hey, it worked. I was able to get a lot of epoxy. So usually when you epoxy, you want to over apply for the most part, because you want to have enough in the joint, in the actual affixment that you're creating. So the easiest way to do that is just to over apply, and then it squirts out everywhere, and you sand it off, grind it off, whatever, and finishing. These scales were done. I wasn't going to touch them again, so you get it. Long story short, she worked, but being tabletop epoxy, I had to let it cure. I only let this cure for about 48 hours because it's such a small amount. Anyway, long story short, it worked, and what you're looking at here is the final product. This is what it's gonna essentially look like, though the pins are not done. The size and everything is set, the design, the keys are more or less locked in. So now I'm gonna peen down those pins. Usually when you peen down pins, you're trying to really mushroom them over. I don't want to do that. I just want to expand them back to their original diameter. So beat that cone, that chamfered end down to its original size, and then go, a fraction of a whatever more, so that those pins are just locked in. It's hardwood, they're glued in, there's metal liners, and then swelling it just a little larger than the size of the hole they're in, and they're not going anywhere. I didn't want to go too big because I didn't want to risk cracking the wood. There's not a lot there on the edge, but you get it. What I'm doing here is finalizing the hinge pin, which again, this was the best way to do it with what I had available in the garage, but I don't love it. I did go for a much larger peened end on this one. You can see I put a big pin on it, and I ground her all the way down, and then we peened it to a pretty flat edge, and that was to match the other side, which I just used the nail head. I figured, screw it. And I might ultimately do something else with that, but it's not terrible. Teak oil is the finish I'm going to use. I like teak oil for hardwood, decorative, small stuff like this. I don't love it on furniture, but small stuff, I really like it. And it was the right choice on this one. For sure, that end grain looks different. It's not what you're expecting. You're expecting a little bit more of a dynamic grain pattern down there, and you don't get it. But it's different, and the way it works together, as a one piece, I really like it. I really like the way this looks. The grain pattern's not distracting from the piece as a whole, which a lot of times happens when you make decorative scales like this. So used the teak oil there. We rubbed her in. I think I put about 3 coats on. This is me making a reel for Instagram. If you don't follow me on Instagram, D&E in the garage, you're going to get the once over on all the projects I do, and see this stuff beforehand and just get more content, and I share all kinds of stuff on there. I really enjoy the Instagram community. If you're someone who's into Instagram, give me a follow, man. We have a lot of fun over there. So this project is done as far as the video goes. Like I said, I may change that top pin. Let me know down there in the squawk boxes, what do you think about the aesthetic I chose on this? It's a little bit chunky, but it is vaguely nautical, which is what I was going for, as these are my work keys to the marina there. Leave me a comment down there in the squawk boxes. What do you think? How did I do? I set out to make something interesting with nothing but materials found in my garage. Would you have used something different? What materials in your garage would you have used? What have you built using just materials from your garage? These days, anything we can do to save $1. If you're going to tackle projects, you might have to do it on a budget. So if you liked the video, subscribe to the channel for more stuff like this. As always, thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.